Hey there, beautiful humans, and welcome to the Ryan Magic Show. Today I have one of my best friends on, just a beautiful human being, Patty McDonald. And Patty and I were talking about how to best introduce him before this, and we kind of realized that there's so many areas that he's delved into and has like a lot of competency in that it's not the easiest thing to do. But Patty has gone by the corporate shaman before. I feel like that really epitomizes his capacity to bridge worlds, having a very high executive position in a company, but then having a ridiculously deep experience of the embodiment work in so many different facets of what that means, from plant medicine to breath work to cacao ceremonies to sacred music and ceremonies, and being able to facilitate ecstatic dance and hold nature retreats and men's work. This is just some of the things that Patty has got experience in, as well as like a lot of sacred sexuality work as well.
Awesome, Ryan. Thanks for having me on the podcast, bro. So good to be here.
You're so welcome, man. So there are a bunch of things that I'm really excited to chat about, and we get to explore some things that I see you embody that you might kind of have as a normal day-to-day, not even thinking about the way you go about things. But I'm excited to dive into some things that you do pretty naturally at this point, at least from all the work that you've done.
Yeah.
And a real big intention that I have is for people to understand the essence behind what the embodiment journey means and the purpose behind that, as like and the spirituality journey, like how it benefits people's lives. And the reason why I'm excited to go into this is because you carry so much reverence for all the different spiritual experiences that people can have. There's so much reverence and gratitude and depth and the way that you facilitate it and participate in it. And so for those people that are listening, we'll go into some more specific topics as we go through. But I'd just love to hear like what the journey of spirituality and embodiment, like what it means to you, like just a real candid, why do you do it? Why do you keep going back in to do, like to go to Peru and do plant medicine? Or like, why do you constantly drop into ceremony? Yeah.
A great question. Sometimes I question that myself. So firstly, thanks for the beautiful introduction. And I think like that point around there's some things that come naturally to me that maybe I don't see as my strengths, but you've noticed and want to explore more. I'd love to just really highlight that that's so true for everyone listening to this podcast as well. It's something that like, I feel like my journey with spirituality has in a way been expanding my capacity to do things and to, hold larger spaces, have different tools in my toolkit. But ultimately the spiritual part of the journey has actually been a deepening, use the word depth, into who I already am and removing layers rather than adding extra things. So I just like to like highlight what you already said there, because what I'd love to invite anyone listening to this to feel into as they listen to this podcast is, how am I a mirror? How are you a mirror to the people listening here? Because you're someone who's so great at seeing the greatness within everyone else around you. And I feel like it can be easy when we're listening to things like this to project it out and go, that person's done all these things. Wow, I've got so much work to do. But ultimately, everyone's already incredible. So for me, that's been my biggest journey, is actually like, it's kind of that old hero's journey archetype of the myth, right? Where the hero goes on this massive journey, on this quest to fight all these demons, claim all this treasure, and then they realize the treasure was right back where they started. And so that's been true for me, where I have been on this journey, and I'm still on this journey of really exploring and searching for new and exciting ways to live my life. But actually, where it's really gotten interesting and exciting is when I realized that I didn't actually need to do anything. It's already perfect as it is. And that lesson of everything's perfect as it is something that's very easy to remember intellectually, but actually feeling it and embodying it is the lifelong practice that I'm still on. And so that's kind of why I keep going back to it, is because whenever I've got a glimpse of it, whether it be through plant medicine or breath work or any of the modalities, they're all different access points to a similar truth. This shows me a felt sense of what it means to be at one with the world around me, this connection, this union, this, another way to say, love. But then when day-to-day life kicks in, my fears can come back up, and my old patterns and conditioning can take me back into ways of operating that don't feel as free as those states that I was able to access. And so continually putting myself through these initiations has allowed me to deepen into feeling these states of freedom on a more consistent basis.
That's beautiful. I really, really love that, man. And what I'm hearing is a state of freedom is like a really big experience that you're moving towards, and you touch on when you do ceremony in different times. And I find it interesting because in society, a lot of people, I feel like everyone loves the idea of freedom as a concept, and usually time and financial freedom are the most tangible ways that people see freedom and believe that freedom exists for them. I want freedom. I'm not free right now. But I feel like in society, very few people, unless they've touched on this journey, prioritize the internal freedom that you're referencing. And I'm curious for you, like when you realized, like what was your point of realization that internal freedom was something worth pursuing versus external freedom?
Yeah, I was very blessed at an early age to have some very contrasting experiences, which really helped me get a sense of like what actually was important to me and still is important to me in this life. I got to travel when I was 21 and go do a semester abroad in the Netherlands and spend 6 months living over there, studying, just having the best time traveling around and meeting new people. And I remember having this moment in the university courtyard, just kicking a soccer ball around with my new friends and just feeling like life literally can't get any better than this. I can't imagine a way that I could feel better than this right now. And my bank account is probably as low as it could be. It might even be negative. And like, cool, awesome. This is the baseline. Anything from here, like, is massive bonus because it's already capped out, it feels. And simultaneously, I was also at that stage taking 6 months off, but I was in the process of building my career as an accountant and in the corporate world. And through that, I was really privileged to have access to a lot of really financially successful people and supporting them in their visions to create wealth for themselves and their families and to get their impact shared with as wide an audience as possible. And it was really interesting to notice that the wealth and happiness were not correlated. And it's not like they were more unhappy than people without money, but it just didn't seem to be related at all. And it was also interesting to notice it wasn't even just that the wealthy people didn't feel necessarily like on a generalized level, they weren't more happy than non-wealthy people. They also had the same amount of money worries that non-wealthy people had, is what I found. Like I was working with millionaires that were as anxious about their finances as people in negative net asset positions, people with debt. And again, it showed me like, this is an inside job. This is something that like needs to be worked on from the inside out. And it's not right or wrong to have more money. Like, it's a great thing to welcome into our lives, that state of abundance and access to more experiences. But it's, for me personally, it's not a priority over really feeling that state of freedom inside first. And I think my biggest hero in this space would be Nelson Mandela. I remember hearing his story about how, you know, in that prison, that prison cell where he was oppressed and held in there, he was able to find forgiveness for the people that put him there and really find this sense of freedom whilst sitting in a cage. And from that place, he was able to walk out the doors walk into the presidency of South Africa and become a spiritual leader to millions, if not billions of people around the world. And like, for me, that's such a great example that like that external manifestation of his freedom was, I believe, a representation of what he'd already achieved inside.
That's such a beautiful example. I love that. I didn't really, because I knew his story from the past, but I knew it before I got into spirituality. And you just like referencing and reflecting that back, just it kind of almost excited me. the idea of having an opportunity for a challenge like that would create nonstop access to attempting to create more freedom. It's almost like, what else are you going to do in prison? Like, I'd be meditating all the time if I was in prison. So
yeah, for sure. And like something I've heard you speak to a bit, that like every situation has equal drawbacks and benefits. I think you take it from John Demartini's work, and that that's something that like I believe wholeheartedly as well. Like there's it's nothing's better or worse. They're just different flavors of life's experience. And you know, I'm personally not calling in a situation where I'm going to find myself in prison, but whatever comes for me in life, I'm going to do my best to find the gift. And returning to that state of gratitude is probably the greatest spiritual teaching that I've received, is just whatever comes my way, thank you. Just really dropping into that state of, okay, cool. I might not understand why it's come for me, but having faith that there is a larger plan and that it is for my benefit, and it may be even for my pleasure in the moment. Like, how can I actually drop into gratitude in the moment?
I'm curious to know with you and gratitude, because I always invite you to do gratitude. If there's a bunch of us hanging around, we're having dinner or whatever, and I'm like, yo, Patty, you can do the gratitude for the food before we go. And the reason why is because you access what feels like a really sincere feeling of gratitude, and I can feel how much you care about the effort that's gone into the food and the spirit of the animals that have given their lives for us to be able to have that nourishment and sustenance. Are there ever times where, like, how would you recommend for people to, and myself as well, to access the most authentic feeling of gratitude? Because sometimes I'm ticking the box. You know, I do gratitude before every meal. So usually 2 or 3 times a day minimum. And I do it when I do the heart's prayer. I actually feel it a lot when I do the heart's prayer. But not always as much when it comes to the food ones. And I'm curious, like, do you have times where you do do gratitude and you're not feeling it as much? And how do you access it?
All the time. Like, I had some cacao, sat in a little mini cacao ceremony for myself before this podcast, and I was sitting there probably for a solid 3 minutes beforehand, just like in total resistance to expressing any form of gratitude, just because I was in my own state of constriction. And eventually, I think this is where structures are actually supportive. And, you know, if I do gratitude 3 times a day, so 21 times a week, I might feel it. Let's just say I feel it 3 times the whole week. That's 3 times more than if I didn't do it at all.
Cool.
So, like, this is, for me, the structures are important just to like create the opportunity for the feeling to come through. And it's not always going to be there. And so my practice is to not judge myself when it doesn't come through, to like do my best to open up the channel, but then just allowing life to be as it is. But I've found by saying the words and by like having a certain pathway that I know has worked for me in the past. So for example, with food, I like to thank the animals. I like to even go through and just thank every single plant that I know was part of the meal. And like occasionally now I even like Google, like, okay, I'm having a banana. Let's Google a picture of the banana tree. Let's see what the banana tree looks like and like see if I can embody that energy in my life. Like it's this got so much power and beauty to it that just when I'm looking at, you know, a smoothie, I'm not necessarily tuning into. When I look at the whole tree, I'm like, okay, cool. There's a bit more going on here. So I've got certain things that I feel like have a higher percentage chance of taking me into that state, but it doesn't always do it. And that's okay, I feel.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like, again, coming back to this idea of it creating a state, because some people listening might be thinking, why do you care so much about whether you feel the gratitude or not? And it's like the person that benefits is the one that is giving the gratitude, even though it's an honoring, and it is definitely channeled in the direction of what we're feeling grateful for. If we can access it, we get to benefit from it. And this really leads me to a topic that I've been wrestling and struggling and fearing for the last year, which has been intimacy in romantic relationship. And I feel as though the reason that most people, and myself included at times, struggle to open up to like gratitude, or there's resistance to things like gratitude or honoring someone or surrendering and forgiving in an argument, is because it's actually really scary and it's very exposing. And it takes a lot of courage to access gratitude and joy and some of these positive emotions. And my experience is that what I see is that men struggle more to access vulnerable, I'm going to say positive emotion. It's just what I witness. It's like most relationships, if it was just someone says, cool, you got to answer a quiz, there's a random couple in another room, one of them's kind of like a little bit more kind of like cold and grumpy, and the other one's more like loving and like joyful. Which one's which? I would just have to guess that the man would be more grumpy and kind of like, that's just my experience of seeing men and women in relationship and in life. We tend to be more serious and logical, and women tend to be more open and vivacious. I'm curious to know, like, because, what are your thoughts on that or experience?
It's beautiful awareness, and like, there's obviously everyone's going to have their own experience of that. My sense of what you're saying here is that when we're in tune with our emotions, in whatever form they're coming through, whether it's the grief or the joy or the gratitude or the shame, when the emotions are flowing, then we're going to be able to access a wider range of them in whatever form they're actually hearing. And when we're talking about male and female, we're not talking about masculine and feminine energies, because these are different things and we can go into that. But by virtue of being in a masculine body, it is more likely that I have a higher access to masculine energies than I do feminine energies by default. That's something that, like, just by nature of the body I was born into, and this, again, people have their own perspectives on this, but my perspective is that I am going to have more of a masculine energy that leans me more towards structure, stability, and less open to the flow and the chaos of all of the constantly shifting emotions. And so therefore, when something comes up that threatens that stability, it's easier for me by default to shut down. And so, like, as a man, my journey has been like really accepting that feminine energy within inside myself, all of the emotions amongst other things, and building a relationship with each of the different emotions, so that I can welcome them in. And by welcoming in sadness and anger and shame and these other emotions that society tells us are not acceptable to express amongst other people or even by myself, by welcoming these in, I now have opened up the flow for all of the emotions, including the joy and the laughter and the gratitude, to come through much more naturally as well.
Yeah, I personally found that when I was more in masculine energy in the past and hadn't yet integrated as much of my feminine energy, I found it very difficult to authentically honor the feminine within the particular partner that I would be with, or if I was with a woman, because I didn't understand it as much. And And I found that when I started to feel a lot more, not only did I have more compassion for myself, but that definitely translated straight into any other people in my life that had more access to feminine energy.
Totally, man. Totally. And like my experience of this and from, absorbing the teachings of other experts in this space has been that, again, as a man, when I'm out in the world looking to relate to women, especially now that I'm married and have a beautiful divine partner that I'm building a life with, the safest that a woman feels is when they're allowed to be in their feminine flow in whatever's coming up. So like me feeling unsafe with with my partner expressing her emotion and trying to shut that down or change it is going to make them feel less willing to connect with me. But when I'm comfortable with the emotions that are coming up with inside myself, and my partner or just anyone else that I'm relating with is expressing some form of emotion that feels a little bit challenging, I'm able to recognize that this is something that's now triggering something in myself. Okay, cool. My partner's expressing some anger. Right. How do I feel? I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling sad now. Okay. Can I own this as my own, not shame it and judge it, potentially express it, and really hold this frame that it's all welcome. It's all part of the human experience and it's all beautiful. And again, coming back to gratitude, it's here for us. It's a gift. Why else would it be here and showing up in our life if it wasn't as a gift for us to experience in all its fullness?
Yeah, I love that, dude. I feel like so much of the healing journey and the embodiment journey is about connecting to our body, which houses emotion. And what you just said of, if we can't honor the emotion in someone that we're relating to, they feel less safe and less able to connect to us. And connection is giving and receiving of love. And what I notice and what I've experienced in different relationships myself is when I haven't been able to honor the emotions in a partner, they've shut down and the giving and receiving of love stops. That means that my partner doesn't feel safe to give as much to me, so I don't get to receive as much. But also, they don't have the capacity to trust the love that I'm giving because they feel less safe. So then in the times where I do open up and I do say a compliment, or I do buy a gift or do some form of giving love, that often it's met with resistance or skepticism because there's that still nuanced feeling of unsafety from that last time that I wasn't able to fully love and accept them in their emotion. And that over time in my previous relationships has built up as an energy of resentment and literally like a wall between our connection. And it's gotten worse and worse because then if I tried to give and she doesn't have the capacity to receive because she's not feeling it, because she's feeling skeptical or lack of trust, now I feel a little bit more shut off because my giving of love wasn't received. And then I pull back and I give less. And then when she goes to give, I'm more skeptical. And then it's just kind of for me, it's been that experience has existed in every relationship, including my current relationship. There's just been a lot more awareness and I've navigated it a lot better. But yeah, I feel like the healing journey is so much about emotion. I'm curious to know from what you see in the space of when the healing journey becomes too feminine, your thoughts on that, experience of it, and perspective on that. An example would be like that's often called women that I've spoken to in the spiritual community. I'm just going to speak mainly to standard male to female relating. The women in Austin that were seeking male partners referred to flow boys, and they would call spiritual men who did a lot of men's work and were very connected to their emotion and the healing work and spirituality and meditation and ecstatic dance, flow boys. And they felt a real inability to feel safe around them because they didn't have that masculine energy, that dependability, stability. I'm curious because I felt like a flow boy at seasons for sure. What's your
Yeah, for sure.
experience
And
and perspective of that?
I think it's a really important thing to honor for anyone on the journey as well, is that there may be some pendulum swinging before we find that equilibrium, that middle path as well. And so for these flow boys, for example, that might be a really necessary part of their journey in landing in the integrated version of themselves where they have a strong relationship to their masculine and to their feminine. And so you're really honoring anyone who's in that phase, and also acknowledging that if they do want to swing back to the middle rather than all the way back to either side, that there is definitely a balance that's required. And the balance isn't always going to be 50-50. Some people are going to like naturally be more in their feminine essence, and some people more in their masculine essence, and that's fine. It's beautiful, actually, the diversity. I'd say, like, the way I've heard it expressed in our community in Melbourne is I've heard women in our community speak to a fact that they've struggled to find, quote unquote, conscious men who are willing to commit. So it's that level of commitment, which is what I'm going to just generalize as the masculine essence. It's that conviction that, like, I am here and I'm so solid that I can stand in the storm of whatever feminine chaos is going to come up, not just from my partner, but like around our sacred union, around our relationship. And I'm going to hold the frame and the safety for us as a family unit, no matter what. Like, again, like, that's purely speaking to the masculine essence. And I'm not saying that like 100% that way is necessarily right or wrong, but that's what I hear is like the version of the masculine that sometimes some women are perceiving is missing in men that have swung a bit far to the flow and the that desire for being like very attuned to the present moment, and like really like I guess where I've seen this a lot is in, especially in like the tantra communities. There's a very big proportion relatively of people exploring polyamory and open relating, and this is something that I believe from my limited personal experience is a beautiful philosophy, and there's so much like love that's expressed through this desire to like just follow the impulse of like a moment to moment, like where does my heart and my body want to be, and who does it want to connect with? And there's so much beauty in that, and it's such a beautiful way of life for the people that choose it. And it's also one way of operating, and sometimes in an unintegrated form of it be missing that commitment to, I'm going to show up for the person I'm committing to, regardless how I feel. And something I've journeyed with, like stepping into marriage just a couple of months ago, is like, cool, like I've made my vows now to my wife, Amina, who, just quick side note for anyone who's not aware, like Ryan was my best man, and like was such an incredible best man. And I like, so you've got to see firsthand my journey with this. And for me, this was a real like stake in the ground moment. It's like, cool, like, yes, I am one with everything, like consciously, like spiritually, I understand, like I am one with everything. And in this lifetime, I'm going to choose to experience and explore this little cross section of the universe. I'm going to, of the whole cake of life, I'm going to just take this slice and just really commit to this slice, no matter what. And sure, like there'll be times where that doesn't necessarily feel like my truth. I'm sure over the course of a lifetime, there'll be times where I'm like feeling the fear around like, is this something that like, that I'm able to hold? Like, I feel like that's a part of the human experience, is the doubts and the fears that come up. But by being supported by this structure of marriage and this structure of making these vows my word, and trusting that like my word is my bond, right? Like I have integrity to the things that I say. So even if I'm not feeling it in the moment, well, cool. My masculine doesn't care about that. I'm in now.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, really, really love that. I feel like that's a real powerful practice to layer on top of the capacity to feel emotion and experience emotion and go with the feeling and be in touch with that chaos inside, is the capacity to discern whether you want to ride the chaos or whether you decide that you'd like to do something different to what the chaos is desiring. And I feel like that integration that you have, you're a phenomenal testament to that. And I'm really curious to know for you, like this macro idea of like masculine commitment, how has it felt for you? Like obviously there'd be a myriad of different emotions that have come up before, during, and after marriage.
Yeah.
But how is it, what are some of the shifts that you've made in your internal world and in your approach to life off the back end of deciding and making that commitment?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm still landing in it. So 2 months in, and what I've noticed is because I moved quite quickly, I was very clear very quickly that this was, it was the person I wanted to spend my life with and commit to. And so the universe created ways for this to happen really organically, but really quickly. And so now, because of that speed and that deepening of intimacy on a quick, at a really quick pace, there's been, like, it comes with its own sense of the challenges and the fears and the internal things that come up with that. And so for me, like, I'm still kind of integrating that experience. And the way I'm choosing to do that is to really just like lean in, just go as deep into it as possible. And it's interesting because like I'm someone who in my past has had real challenges with codependency, and something that like was very present in my previous relationships, and to the point where it caused significant psychological and emotional harm to both myself and my ex-partner. And this is something that I still hold a lot of emotional pain around, and a lot of fear around recreating those same dynamics. And so there's a part of me that like wants to keep my partner at a distance and like really operate as two independent beings in the world, and like really, you know, be this kind of model of like we're our own sovereign beings, and, you know, we're like partners, but we're still two very separate people. And I feel as though what I'm being invited into at the moment is like to kind of throw that aside for a little bit and just enjoy the deepening into intimacy, and just enjoy like the coziness of like this moment of beautiful union and connection, and just really like just trust as well that like I'm not the same person who experienced those pains and those challenges in my past, and that like I have the tools now to actually navigate through it as well. So so in that, I guess like there's a little bit of like letting things come up within me that previously might have felt like this is going in a direction that could be unhealthy. Watching it, like just maintaining presence and watching it happen, and then like letting myself organically choose when to shift it, rather than like putting up all these barriers before it happens out of fear that I can't handle it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, that you're just really backing yourself to be able to navigate whatever comes up. So you're willing to like venture wider and deeper.
Yeah, I think one way I'd love to express this actually is I recently, as you know, went on a big journey overseas for about 4 months in South America and did a lot of different modalities that are really key to me, like plant medicine and tantra, and like real deep immersive experiences for weeks on end. And I feel as though like, there's always more to the journey, but I feel as though at least at this stage of my life, I explored my spirituality to the maximum ability that I'm able to at this point in my life. And one of the biggest lessons I took from that is that now it's time to really explore my humanity and really land in the imperfect human with all the different triggers and emotions and things that are going to come up naturally just as part of being human. And I think I've got this desire built in within me to get things perfect and to like really navigate things with so much ease and like be able to like predict and cut off any challenges before they even happen. And the invitation that I was given is like, cool, man, just go for it. Just live your life, man, and fuck it up along the way. And cool, awesome. Like, great. You're doing a great job of being human.
I really love that, because I feel as though myself, I've had a lot of invisible, unrealistic expectation that I've had modeled to me through social media, where I found it very quick to judge and kind of go, well, I saw that one person doing it like that. And my kind of insecurities went, well, I should be able to do it like that. But it was so many assumptions and so many masks and facades and fantasies being displayed. And I really stand so strongly now for being able to honor the full humanity that we all have, knowing that the pedestals that we put people on are made up. They're not true. And I know that you and I both have met a lot of thought leaders. Like, I've been around a lot of really successful people with hundreds of thousands of followers online that are the full pedigree of what the human potential is meant to be. Like people like best-selling authors and thought leaders around the world, and Hay House authors. And I've just met so many of these people that I know. I know people that look up to them so much, but I also know them behind the scenes. And nobody that I've met has not been like full balanced in their like empowerment and disempowerment. They're like light and shadow. Everyone has had both of those pretty equally.
Yeah. Fully agree. And I love meeting these, what I like to call secret Buddhas in the world. Like, so like my nan was one of these people, and like people like just random, just farmers in Guatemala. There's just people that just are radiating so much joy, and they've no doubt got their challenges behind the scenes as well. But my sense of them is just their energy is on a consistent basis experiencing a state of bliss and sharing that with the people around them. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, that's my model for success. And I still, like, again, don't want to pedestal them and like treat them as being these perfect godlike beings that can do no wrong, because I'm sure they've got their own demons. But still, like, I feel like there's it's a reminder to me that success comes in so many different forms, and it's going to be so unique to every single person that there's not even no point in comparing, but it's actually harmful.
I love that, dude. I've got a question for you around from everything that you've learned with spirituality and the embodiment work, and you've done so much deep inner work. And I know you're someone that really you back yourself to navigate challenging personal situations and be able to hold that yourself. You also ask for support. I know that. But I feel, if I contrast you with me and other people that I know and people that I coach as well, you really have a lot of confidence, even though you are a human and you're not perfect. But I'd love to hear from you some of the tools and strategies, like as candidly as possible as well, like just a messy reality of what holding emotion can look like for you and holding challenge can look like for you. Let's say something comes up in your relationship and you're feeling super triggered and there's all this stuff being unearthed from you. Like, what do you do in those situations that are supportive for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, because as much as I've got experience in navigating these spaces, it still comes up where I feel unable to access this sometimes. Sometimes, like the last couple of weeks, for example, I've been noticing that I've been holding a lot of emotion. It's been at the surface and I've got a desire to express. I'm someone who really values the flow of my emotion to come through. But for whatever reason, I haven't felt emotionally safe to let it through. And I can analyze that as much as I want, but it's just the reality of it right now. So I think the biggest thing that supports me, though, is having a relationship with emotion that really encourages and celebrates it when it comes through. I have my practices, like emotional release practices, for example, are some of the pillars of my emotional health. So, like, for example, I've run events and I like to do this on my own, where I put on a playlist of music that's designed to take me through all the different emotional states. So from like real intense movement and potentially rage and anger, punching pillows, dancing like a madman, and then like opening up to like grief and sadness and like real despair, even like really going to the depths of these emotions and letting them flow has been such a powerful tool for me. And sometimes I do it and I just like can't even get myself to move. I'm just like sitting there going, oh, okay, I guess I should like punch this pillow. Like, cool. Like, that's the extent of where I'm feeling. And I've had times like that where I do that. And then I'll just be like, oh, I give up. I'm just going to watch some Netflix, and I'll put on like some trashy TV show, which I love, like, Lucifer or something like that. And I remember like I did that once, and the way that the episode was constructed was perfectly orchestrated to hit the exact emotional triggers that I was feeling resistance around. And next thing I know, 10 minutes in, I'm bawling my eyes out, having this deep emotional release that like I wasn't able to access with all the spiritual tools that I thought would get me there. And so I think like this is ultimately, in my view, of the key elements of ceremony and spiritual, going into these spiritual spaces, is having two core foundations. One of them is intention. So having a request or direction or like a reason why I'm doing this. And so for this, it's like I'm setting the intention to move my emotions so that I can feel alive and free and present. And then the second part is surrender, which is the letting go. So that's what I'm explaining just there, is that I really wanted to move this energy, but I wanted to move it so bad that I was holding it so tight. And it was when I kind of gave up. I was like, all right, cool, it's not going to happen. And then all it came.
Yeah, beautiful. I also see like you tend to hold emotion well and be able to notice when it's present, but not need to be affected by it as much with the awareness. Can you speak to how you do that? Because that's something that I find challenging. Like, I also like to move things. I think I'm improving with it, but I definitely see you like exemplify a really high level of holding capacity.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, man.
Yeah.
So I feel like what you're speaking to here is leadership. And I mean, many ways to define leadership and many traits in it. But one of the things that I feel is important when we're in a leadership role within a group is to have a sense of where the whole group is at and what's in service of the whole group. And this doesn't mean that you're up the front, right? A leader can be someone just off to the side as a participant or as a team member, but who is prioritizing the welfare of the whole group. And so anyone can access this. And so by attuning to like, what are other people feeling right now? What does the group need? Like, sort of getting a sense of that. And then when I'm able to also kind of, as a paradox, look inside and go, wow, yeah, I'm feeling a bit anxious right now. But what the group needs right now is to be taken in a certain direction. They need to be led in, feeling safe, so that they can maybe have some emotion come up or anything like that. And so what helps me in those moments is, the metaphor I like to use is that of a jug of water. So when there's emotion that's in the jug, if it's within the capacity of the jug, then I like to hold it, because emotion is energy. And when I've got emotion circulating my system and it's actually present, I'm feeling alive and like charged up. When it's too much for me to handle, that's when I like to release some emotion. And so let's say I'm in a group situation and I need to let some out. And maybe it's not in the best interest of the group for me to do that in front of them. It might be worth me just quietly removing myself for 5 minutes, doing some of the emotional release tools like screaming it out, or letting out some tears or something like that, and then returning. It also, as I know you're really passionate about as well, like leading with this vulnerability is such a powerful tool as well that I really encourage. But just having that sensitivity to like, what do I need? What does the collective need? And what are any individuals that I'm relating with one-on-one, what do they need as well?
Yeah, dude, that's powerful stuff. So with that jug analogy, let's say, for example, you're with Mina and triggers are coming up. What's the discerning point where the jug overflows? If you're biting back unconsciously and you're being triggered and you're reacting, is that a sign for you that you're past your capacity, so it's leaking out? Or with awareness, are you able to or is that kind of metaphorically the jug's being shaken around and water's splashing out the top, but with awareness you can just settle it down and it's still inside the capacity of the jug, and maybe you could hold it with awareness? How do you navigate getting that balance right when you're with an intimate partner and triggers are coming up?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, one that I'm still working on, but it's very much like, for me, what you said resonates, where when I think the biggest key for me though is really returning to the truth that each person's expression is their own expression. And so if my partner is expressing some form of anger or sadness, it can be very easy for me to feel like, oh, this is about me, and they're saying that I've done something wrong here. And then my defensiveness can come up and I can start to feel my own sense of like wounding and like sadness about, but I didn't mean that. What are they talking about? But even if the language, and I'm blessed to have a partner who's very emotionally aware herself, but when someone is putting language and their expression of their emotion is making it seem like it's about me, the best thing that I can do in that situation is to just stand in my own boundaries, just really sit with the fact that, cool, this person is having an emotional experience, regardless of the words they're using. It's not about me. How can I be of service to this person? Especially if I love them, especially if I say that I love them. And even in this moment, I might be feeling some fear and resistance, but like ultimately in the scheme of things, I love them. So how can I really be of service to them? Because that's ultimately going to be of service to me. And the best thing I can do is hold space. So that this term of holding space is something we hear a lot about in spiritual circles, where my definition of holding space is what the words actually mean, right? It's like we're keeping enough space between ourselves and someone else that it's clear that we're each having our own experiences, but we're also holding like ourselves close enough that we're not like feeling so separate that the person feels abandoned as well. So through our presence and being with them and like, echoing back anything that they need to hear, that they're understood, and really, acknowledging their emotions as valid, we can like create that sense of closeness, but simultaneously we can, through our own language, lead the conversation into a place of self-ownership where, for example, they might be expressing something like, you didn't do the dishes. What, like, why didn't you do that? Like, you always do this. And then I can say something like, thanks for expressing how you're feeling at the moment. I'm noticing that like I'm feeling a bit scared at the moment and a little bit like I'm noticing my pattern of wanting to withdraw because I'm feeling, even if this isn't your intention, I'm feeling like I'm being blamed in the situation. And sometimes that can have the effect of the other person stopping and checking themselves and going, oh, wow, they're taking ownership of the fact that they're wanting to withdraw and this is their own stuff. I don't want that. How can I actually bring a collaborative energy to this conversation rather than a combative energy?
Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I really love the way that you framed that holding of space, being not too close, not too far, but having those boundaries without abandoning. That's like a really clear, beautiful like way that I've never heard it explained that way. I think you've heard it once before, but it didn't land last time like it did just then. So thanks for that. That's beautiful. Yeah. And then what percentage of the time, if ever, I'm assuming it's some percentage of the time, do you feel that your capacity to stay in that situation is limited because your capacity is like the emotions in the jug are overflowing or too close to the top that you can't hold it? Or do you think that if somebody has this awareness, it's almost like a practice in which they can sit there in front of someone and maintain those boundaries? Because and like that practicing, not taking it personally, like do you feel like that's a real practice and someone will be able to hold, like stay there in service a higher percentage of the time if they can hold space with boundaries? Or
definitely feel like it's a practice, and it brings to mind the work that's been done around attachment styles. So the idea of anxious versus avoidant attachment styles. And like I feel like when someone is aware of their own patterns in these kind of dynamics, if I'm someone who typically when conflict comes up, all I want to do is walk away and avoid, then my growth edge is going to be choosing to just stay that bit longer than's comfortable and just like seeing how much I can sit in it and like really, even if it requires me to sit there and like create some space internally as the starting point, eventually through that growing that muscle, I'll be able to be there and be real present with whatever's coming up. Alternatively, if my which I think is more my pattern, when there's conflict, I notice like more of an anxious attachment style where I feel afraid of walking away and creating that space for myself. And sometimes like I really need some space for myself. And so catching it earlier and just acknowledging that, like, hey, just so you know, to the person I'm speaking with, just so you know, I'm having a lot of emotions come up right now. I'm feeling past my capacity to handle this in a way that feels in line with the love I have for you. And I just want to like take a moment to really recenter within myself. So are you cool if I just go for a walk for half an hour and come back when we finish this conversation? Like that's the kind of edge that I want to lean more into and actually do more often. What I feel like I'm able to do at the moment, which I think is also powerful, is the exact same conversation where acknowledging what's coming up and just asking for a few breaths and saying, I'm noticing all this activation come up. I'm noticing myself go into a real fear response. Are you cool if we just take a few breaths together? And I've never had a no to that. So just taking that time to recenter myself also helps them recenter themselves as well. And then coming back from a place of presence and connection has really helped dissolve any tension that's been there.
That's really beautiful, man. From the outside listening to you, it's definitely it's definitely the picture that's being painted is that energetically is that there's acceptance and messiness, and there's a work in progress, and there's edges and stretches, and then also there's a high level of like leadership that you're talking about. And so I felt the call just to let the listeners know that like I don't have that same high level of leadership at the moment in my capacity to navigate relationships. And for me, like a lot of the times it's coming back and apologizing because I didn't do those things. That is where the conversation and challenge ends up leading to.
Yeah.
But I feel like those were some beautiful tools that you shared, and it's just really inspiring to hear a high level of willingness and capacity to hold, share, and connect in those moments of emotions coming up.
Yeah. Thank you, man. I think forgiveness is such a beautiful, beautiful experience as well. So like, I love the humility that comes with someone choosing to apologize as well. Like, it's something that I really value and want to lean more into myself.
Yeah, you might potentially need to apologize less if you're proactively inviting deep breaths in the conversation.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, I'd love to. This has been so helpful so far, man, and really honoring this like beautiful conversation of the healing work and the embodiment work. And I would love to bring home this conversation, which will be the first of many that we'll have on this podcast over the years. To create some space to talk about leadership in relevance to the dingo energy and the animal, the dingo. And would love to just pre-frame why we're going to talk about the dingo so the listeners have some context, and then go into like a bit of a deep dive and some random questions and curiosity, and to see where it flows.
Sure.
But the dingo as an animal is essentially the king of the ecosystem. It's the apex predator of the Australian wilderness, but it's also what's called, is it like a top autotrophic regulator? Is that the name for it? That's
top autotrophic regulator. Nailed
it. Okay, there's been a long time since I haven't nailed it, so now I'm starting to get it. And so this creature essentially has a specific role at the top of the food chain that is unbelievably sophisticated and benevolent in terms of the service of the health of the entire ecosystem, that I had no idea about until yourself and the dingo expert from the Great Ocean Road Wildlife Sanctuary, Joe, has taught you and I, and you've taught me a lot about the way that the dingoes work. And I'd love for us to explore and teach people a little bit more about the dingoes first, and then explain like the ridiculous level of embodiment of leadership that they hold, and how those that are listening, myself as well, can take some of those codes and model some of that ridiculously impressive leadership capability.
Awesome, brother. So I think I want to start by just speaking to why this is important for people to really listen to and really hear, because sometimes like I have this sense that like what's happening in nature, in the natural world, is beautiful but separate to what's happening in my human life and in civilization. And the reality is it's just not the case, right? Like every single thing that we see around us has come from nature in some form, right? It's all been constructed from raw materials that have come from nature. And like, think about medicine, for example, like every single medicine, when you go right back to the source ingredient originally, it came from a plant or an animal or something like that. Like, there's still new medicines being discovered in the Amazon, like to this day, and so many more undiscovered ones out there too, that if we lose them, like who knows what opportunities we'll lose to really thrive as humans, as a society, but individually as well. And so if you've been the benefit of medicine, you've been the benefit of nature. And simultaneously our food, right? Like what we rely upon to actually function and live and just every day keep moving is from nature. Every single part's from nature. I'm speaking the obvious here, but it just needs to be said. The other one is, right, like the trees. Without trees, we don't have oxygen to breathe. So like the health of nature is so intertwined with our own health as humans. And I also think, like, on a more sort of spiritual level, it's so interesting how, like, as a society, we have a lot of health individuals with our health issues come up with our physical bodies. And my sense is, my experience is that this is a representation of the relationship we have with our earth body, right? With the relationship we have with the planet is the same that we have with our own bodies. I'm talking about it on a collective level here. So it's really anchoring in this importance of why the health of nature is so critical to our own ability to thrive as humans. And the other reason this is important is because dingoes as leaders, and all animals actually, but especially I'm going to speak to dingoes here, have so many lessons that we can learn from, which I just find it so much fun to like model the lessons that I'm taking from these beautiful animals that are like just going out living their lives in such unique and interesting ways. And every animal has lessons, but yeah, like as someone who wants to step more into leadership and have already done so, it's by learning from the creatures that are just naturally for millennia operating as leaders in the ecosystem. They're the best ways that I can actually bring that leadership forward in my own life as well. So to speak to like how the dingo actually operates as a leader, as you mentioned, they're what's called the top order trophic regulator, which is a subset of the apex predators of the world. So we're talking about other versions of this being the lions, the wolves, the grizzly bears, great white sharks, the orcas, eagles, tigers, these kind of animals. So these like are some of the most revered and respected and loved animals in the world, right? And interestingly, in Australia, we don't have that same relationship with the dingo, even though it's been around by, it's argued, but it's definitely minimum 3,500 years, most likely 10,000 plus. It's been here in Australia operating as the leader of the ecosystem. And Indigenous Aboriginal tribes have been working side by side with these animals to really thrive and live in harmony with nature. And the way the dingo operates is it really innately looks at the whole system and goes, what's needed here? Not what's needed for me, what's needed, full stop. And when it sees that the populations directly under it, such as the larger carnivores, like at the moment we have a high number of foxes and feral cats, when it sees that they're overpopulated, it will actively go out to bring those numbers down. When it sees like other numbers of animals under their control are underpopulated, it will actually go out there and protect those animals. So this is something that like I don't think we really expect from a predator, right? Like often I'm thinking a predator is just only out there choosing to like kill things, eat things, like just really have this kind of dangerous vibe about it. But it's actually also out there as the protector of what it feels is in the best interest of the whole ecosystem. And why this is important is because at the moment in Australia, because we've taken the dingo out of the ecosystem by treating it as a pest, especially below the dingo fence, is that we've got record numbers of kangaroos exploding. I think there's 55 million kangaroos right now, where we actually pay people to go out there in helicopters and shoot them to bring the numbers of kangaroos down. And what the record number of kangaroos is doing is overgrazing the whole landscape. So soil degradation, deforestation is all happening as a matter of course because we've got too many large herbivores grazing the environment. The dingo would naturally bring them down just by doing its job, just by living its life. And
just to jump in with some context, like,
yeah,
if you do, because I didn't know this, I didn't know much about the dingoes at all, or the kangaroos, or anything before coming in. Like, I didn't even know that they were considered pests, really. Like, so if you're in Australia or overseas, in Australia, even though the dingoes have been native to Australia for a long time, at some point across history, they migrated from the islands above, and then they took over as the top autotrophic regulator, which is that regulation. That's why they call it regulator. Like they literally regulate the numbers. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But they came over, and in Australia, they're seen as pests. And the reason they're seen as pests, and it's I think it's illegal not to kill a dingo if you have the ability to.
Certain states, yeah.
Certain states, like it's yeah, they're seen as something that should be killed. They're definitely not protected. And the reason why is because agriculture is big in Australia, and the dingo, being a animal that wants to look after the environment and regulate the numbers so that the whole ecosystem thrives, the dingoes look at these like paddocks full of other animals that are overgrazing the land, and they're like, these things the numbers shouldn't be like this. I'm going to go kill a bunch of them to get the numbers down. And so farmers are getting really frustrated that their livestock has been killed in certain times, not all the time, because if it's kind of outside the dingo's territory, they won't touch them. But they're so intelligent that they'll literally try to regulate the numbers of these farm animals, and then the farmers get really frustrated because it impacts their profit. And then they communicate and lobby to the government to make them be deemed a pest. And the government has no reason to be like, there's not like government officials are going out there thinking about the ecosystem. They're just doing their job in parliament. They're just like flicking papers around and approving laws and trying to get put into power and trying to regulate and deal with the reactive demands of what's going on. So they've like probably from no bad intent just gone, oh, there's a problem. We're just going to now label them a pest and make sure that the numbers get brought down. So they cull the dingo numbers. They get people to kill the dingoes. And so the numbers of dingoes in Australia are massively decreased. And that's what we're referring to as a problem right now.
Yeah, 100%, man. And look, this is to bring it back to leadership. It's a great example of, as a leader, having a vision that extends beyond the short-term effects. So I'm going to oversimplify it here for the sake of the example, but the original reaction was back when British settlers first arrived here and set up their farms with introduced species, and they noticed that dingoes were taking livestock. And as you said, this is a part of their function, and it's inevitable that some of this is going to happen. What has happened on the back end of that, though, is because the dingo isn't around, other introduced species like the foxes, for example, have exploded in number, where the foxes now actually take more livestock than the dingoes ever did. And the dingoes would only ever take one or two here or there, whereas the foxes don't have this innate sense of leadership of keeping the ecosystem in balance. So they're just going to take as many as they need to for their own survival needs. So there's a very different role that the dingo is playing to the fox, where the dingo is, again, like looking at, and it's not doing this consciously, it's just part of its innate wisdom. It's looking at like the downstream effects here of like what's happening. Whereas what we've done as humans is we've solved the short-term problem and created a larger long-term one. So ultimately, the reason, just to close out like why this is such a big problem, is when we talk about overgrazing by kangaroos because we've got too many of them, we're also talking about the soil quality going down. We're talking about like habitat loss because of trees and things not being able to grow there. We're also talking about reduced agricultural capability because of the land not having the capacity to produce food as it would otherwise. And when we talk about overpopulation of other predators like foxes and things like that, extinction levels in Australia of some of our native species like marsupials are going through the roof. And that's just one level. Beyond that, we have the smaller animals and the smaller plants and all of these other things that is collapsing from the top down. So something that is really important to be aware of.
Yeah, and that's because each animal and wildlife ecosystem needs some kind of top autotrophic regulator, like an animal that qualifies for that position to be able to regulate the numbers from the top down to keep everything in balance. whereas like a fox doesn't have that innate capacity within it. And dogs
Mm.
don't have that innate capacity in it, just like your standard house dog as well. There's like a really big difference in their energy. Wolves do,
Totally.
lions
Totally.
do, sharks do for the ocean,
Yeah.
but only certain animals have this wisdom. And like you said earlier, I would have never thought that a dingo would have the capacity to know these kind of things and be like, okay, cool. What? Because what happens, just to extend on it a little bit, if you're happy for me to speak to some
Yeah,
things I
please do.
remember. Yeah, the dingoes operate in a tribe of like, it's about up to 16 in a pack. It's about
Yeah.
up to 16 dingoes in a pack, right? And then they have their own territory that they look after. They don't even think outside their territory. They'll never cross another dingo's territory. And so spread across the entire Australian native land, if you look back to before English settlement, there were 250,000 people across Australia. That's how many like Australian Aborigines were here. And there were dingoes that would monitor every square meter of the whole country. Just like this territory. And within their territory, if any number gets too big, they just kill them. They just bring their numbers down. And like the fact that they would defend other animals, like the animals whose numbers are low, like let's say kangaroos were low within a territory of a pack of dingoes, the dingo, and then a fox tries to kill the kangaroos, the dingoes will kill the fox or protect the kangaroos from the fox. That's how intelligent they are. And it kind of almost sounds too intelligent to be true, but it is true. And I've experienced the energy of the dingo, and I would call that energy like the most embodied level of leadership energy that I've felt from any animal that I've seen, actually.
Yeah, and so I'd highly encourage anyone who feels called after hearing some of this to actually experience the dingo firsthand. There's some beautiful wildlife sanctuaries around Australia, especially the ones that we're aware of in Melbourne, that we can potentially even post links to, that you can actually go and meet these animals face to face and have your own experience with them. Because ultimately, like, I just want to acknowledge that the way that I've been speaking about this, I'm very passionate about it. And I'm noticing my own sense of like, almost like guilt on behalf of humanity come up. And this sense of like feeling like we've done something wrong. And what I want to transform that into and really operate from is a place of gratitude and just pure admiration and love for these incredible creatures that are just living their lives, making the whole landscape of Australia as habitable for every being that's on it, including us. So really just transforming that into deep reverence and thank and gratitude for the role that these animals are playing is what I would love people to connect to.
Yeah, and just to context set, like fill in any gaps that I feel are here so far for what we've spoken about the dingoes. This is a message that Paddy champions, I get behind massively. And there's a conservation element to what we're talking about, and then there's a learning and leadership element to what we're talking about, but both work hand in hand. The conservation potential consequences, if we don't improve the situation, is that dingoes will go extinct and the whole ecosystem of Australian wildlife will go into chaos more than what it already has. And a lot of like thousands and thousands of plant species, insect species, marsupial species, bird species, it'll cascade out, will go extinct without having some kind of top autotrophic regulator to be able to get the numbers right from the top down. And there's a big illusion of how dingoes are portrayed in Australia, where they're actually, it's communicated that they're dangerous. Like if no one had told me anything and I was just led into the wildlife sanctuary where I met the dingoes, which is one of your second homes that you introduced me to, which is the Great Ocean Road Wildlife Sanctuary. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Wildlife Park. Yeah. If I had never had my knowledge corrected of what dingoes were like, I would not have got in a cage with a dingo. I would have thought it would have tried to kill me or bite me, but they're not like that. They don't actually harm humans. unless they're attacked or provoked or something like that. I would have thought it would be like a lion where you just wouldn't get in there because it'd mess you up. But they're actually so docile and loving and have this like crazy innate wisdom behind the way that they connect with people, that as I've experienced and as like what you and Joe from the Great Ocean Road Wildlife Sanctuary has suggested, is that they're amazing at working with like mentally challenged people. Like they're almost like therapists in a way. And I'd love for you to speak to some of the intelligence that they emit in groups that meet them, and the way that they serve people. Like we'll both like chime in to give our personal connection to what the dingo's nature is like, that we can learn from as a leadership quality.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. And I think like as a more macro thing to just frame this from my perspective is, I feel like the highest functioning people I've witnessed are people that are always learning, and they're taking lessons from everything around them. And like by being in the presence of an animal that's transmitting this lesson of leadership, and what I see is gentle strength, real like ability to be ferociously strong when needed, but by default operating so gently and consciously of its environment. Like by being open to that lesson, like I have the ability to take on more of those traits myself, which I value. So, the dingo is what we're talking about here, but this is applicable to all animals as well. And so want to just provide that too. But what you spoke to about their ability to like really support the healing journey for people is that, well, to give you an example, like a dingo can hear your heartbeat from 20 meters away. Like literally, I can't hear your heartbeat from 20 centimeters away. Like this is insane how sensitive they are to the environment around them. And so they will operate based on the subconscious cues of your nervous system, and they will like operate with you and work with you in a way that is serving. So I've been told that they're actually really amazing at working with kids with autism, for example. They're really amazing at like actually just providing this energetic support system, this ability to like just hold this presence of strength that helps people, let's just broaden it to people, feel safe and be in a way that can allow that healing to unfold. So we spoke before about like masculine and feminine. Like when I'm talking masculine, I'm talking like the ability to hold this presence of safety so that whatever needs to come up can come up and heal and clear. And that's what I feel the dingoes really embody so strongly.
Yeah, Joe was telling us last time, and we saw it last time. So we went down on a trip recently together at Patty's men's retreat that I attended. And there was a group of us, and we went into the enclosure with these two dingoes. And the dingoes essentially just came in order up to those people that needed the most love from start to finish. The people that were the most sensitive or like needing support. That's the order through which the dingo, and the way that the dingo knows is because it can sense its heartbeat and the different variations in the way that the person's nervous system, like you said, was operating. And so what Joe was telling us, who's the owner of that sanctuary, is that whenever a group goes in, the dingo will always go from the most sensitive person with the highest need and finish with the kind of most self-assured kind of alpha person in the group that's kind of more sovereign and okay. And that's how the dingo knows to approach people, because it's there in service. And what I found really interesting with the dingo's energy was, which I find incredibly different to a dog, is that dogs tend to have like this selfish neediness energy, and the neediness might come in like, no, I don't want to talk to you, I'm off. No, I want pats. No, give me pats. Don't give the other dog pats. Give me pats. And there's this like real insecure, like anxious or avoidant attachment kind of thing that goes on with dogs, where they're like, it's kind of trying to get everything that they can, as much food as they can, as many walks as they can. It's just like and I love dogs. I'm a massive dog lover. But the dingo is so self-assured that there is zero of that energy that comes from it. It literally just stands there in what you were describing as that space holder energy in front of people. It was letting us pat it, hug it, do anything really. And it was so comfortable and grounded with its energy. It wasn't like if you stopped patting, it didn't turn around to try to go pat more. And if it wasn't liking the pats, it wasn't like saying stop. It was just like there in full service. It was a life-changing experience for me because I'd never felt that level of benevolent, self-assured leadership on the level of what I felt in a mix of masculine and feminine as well, because there was emotional attunement as well as there was like masculine space holding. So it was really, really phenomenal.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. I love that. Yeah, it's ultimately like why when I was running this retreat, which was called the Integrated King, it was all about men stepping into their own version of their own empowerment as kings of their own life. Like the best way that I could do that is just literally putting people in front of the dingo just to feel what that actually looks like and feels like at an energetic level. I could talk for 10 years and still not have the same level of transmission that is felt by just being in their presence.
Yeah, and I found it really interesting what Joe was saying, that the dingo, that particular dingo that we're in the enclosure with, had been like an amazing teacher for him as well over the years, and been a real discerning, difficult teacher as well, like a hard teacher that would in some ways like not give him attention if he wanted it, to teach him to be more self-assured, and just like real nuanced things like that I just find mind-blowing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So one thing I'd love to just mention in this conversation as well is that like there have been some recent news articles about like some dingo attacks that have happened on Fraser Island. And I just want to really call into firstly a sense of compassion for the people affected by that. Like I can only imagine the fear and the pain that would have been involved in that. And also simultaneously want to invite in this sense of right relationship, right? Like it's what we're talking about here is not taking away the fact that there is a possibility that as a wild animal, especially the apex predator, that there can be incidents where there is some form of danger. And the way it's been explained to me is that typically this happens when the pack dynamics have been disrupted, when a pack has been broken apart, their accountability system for each other is no longer there. And so these things can happen. That's the way it's been explained to me. Also, just acknowledging here that in choosing to live in a holistic way where all the parts of nature are interconnected, it requires a level of understanding about how we can operate in relationship with these animals and with nature in general. And the default response here, which is just like there's nothing to shame here, it's just a fear response that comes up, is to say, they hurt us, let's defend ourselves, let's, like this dingo was killed, for example. And what I'd love to really bring into the conversation is an understanding that this species has a role to play, and how can we play our role? How can we allow it to play its role and live in harmony with that in a way where we create safe ways that we navigate the environment that we live in? And also, how can we play our role in contributing to a system that works in harmony as humans, as a society, and also as individuals within our society as well?
Yeah, I've actually spent a bit of time thinking more deeply about how the dingo's empowerment and disempowerment mirrors the empowerment and disempowerment of human beings as well. Because as much as like a dingo pack, because one other thing that dingoes will do that's very benevolent is that and what a top order trophic regulator needs to be able to have as a attribute to qualify for that role, and not just be a top of the, like an apex predator that doesn't qualify for it, or any other animal, is they need to be able to regulate their own numbers, which to me is like the ultimate form of benevolent leadership, to be able to sacrifice your own numbers to make sure that the ecosystem thrives. I can't think of anything like the fact that one human being would die will make the news of like the whole of Australia. So it's like, and be some catastrophe. Whereas what happens is the dingoes, there is like a alpha male and female breeding pair that lead each pack, and then there's like 3 or 4 other breeding pairs that bonded pairs. And what happens is when it's breeding season, everyone, all the mating pairs and bonded pairs have puppies, but then the alpha female will keep the puppies of them, and they'll go, and the alpha female will kill all the other mated pairs pups, and only and then all of those other bonded pairs will become surrogate parents for the pups of the alpha pair, right? And so they literally sacrifice the numbers of their own pack in order to make sure that they don't overpopulate, and therefore need to have their own needs for survival of their species over consume anything within the ecosystem, which is wild. But the fact that there's that because that's a lot of benevolent leadership happening there. But then what you were just saying is like what happened on is it Fraser Island, where there was an attack, and the dingoes start to function with less predictability and benevolence when they're out of that pack structure that works. That they kind of lose their way a little bit. They lose their capacity to act like they're meant to act, to perform like they're meant to perform. And I feel like there's a lot of overlap between human beings and dingoes in that sense, where if a human being isn't feeling productive and constructive and has some sense of purpose, they also, like we also resort to short-term gratification and get defensive and feel more defenseless and attack and slander and are less agreeable and less collaborative. And I feel like there's a very big overlap there. Do you have something you want to say there?
It's a beautiful lesson and analogy. If we think about any group dynamics, or maybe in a company, for example, we think about like when we have a sense of community and the dynamics are healthy within that, then everyone knows the role that they're there to play, and people are happy to play their roles when they feel like it's all being directed in a benevolent way. As a leader, for example, if the leader of an organization is, to use this metaphor, allowing their own numbers to get too high, potentially, their salary is significantly higher than the others in the organization, I can imagine a situation where the imbalance there causes some dysfunction, right? So by bringing in this sense of like self-sacrifice for the benefit of the collective, right? It's allowing each part to have their role so that the whole thing is sustainable for the long term. And there's like so many other ways you can apply that metaphor, but just coming back into the sense of like, not everyone was made to be the apex predator of a group, right? Not every animal, like a fox, is not made to be at the top of the food chain. A fox is not designed to manage the whole thing. A fox is designed to be a fox, and it's a beautiful animal when it does. But it needs the other animals around it to keep it in balance. Same in any human group as well. Like not every human is designed to be at the top of the quote unquote the food chain or the pyramid. Like some people that are able to access this energy of sensing into what the collective needs and operating from a place of benevolence for the whole group, not just the group inside, but the harmony with the groups around as well. Like these are the energies that I look for in the leader of an organization or of a group. And the people that don't have that, no shame, no judgment whatsoever. But for this stage of where they're at, like, let's find the right place in the structure.
Yeah. And I feel like it's such a beautiful, like, full circle way to bring this podcast towards the closing straight, is for someone to be able to fully have those leadership qualities, there needs to be enough personal safety and liberation and empowerment within who they are as an individual in order to sense into what is needed. And this is where that spiritual journey, the embodiment journey, really comes full circle from what we started with, is that people only start over consuming or becoming selfish over when their egos are too big, and egos are a protection mechanism. So if someone is feeling dysregulated or has disharmony with themselves, that's when that ends up getting projected out. So for example, like a Hitler or someone like this, or someone within a company that starts being greedy and taking too much. The only reason they're trying to have too much is because they're trying to synthetically fill the void that they're feeling in their own sense of self and self-worth, or they don't know how to handle the emotions that are coming up. Maybe their relationship is dysfunctional, and then they bring that inability to know how to handle that into the greed that causes the disharmony in the workplace. So I feel like this really speaks to why the emotional journey of healing can actually support benevolent, really high effective leadership.
Yeah, I love that, man. I love that. And ultimately, my experience of spirituality is that at the core of it all is self-love, self-acceptance. Like when we're able to really look at the parts of ourselves that we've had shame or any judgment around, and bring it into the light out of the shadows, and maybe not choose to act from it, but actually firstly just accept it, and ultimately even appreciate it, right? Come back to that gratitude. That's healing. That's becoming whole. That's finding the parts that we've cut off and bringing it back into wholeness. And that's the part of the root word of the roots of some of these words are similar, right? Healing, wholeness. It's all about feeling like everything is part of a synergistic ecosystem, just like with the dingoes and the ecosystems they manage, right? Every animal plays its critical part when in balance. Same with ourselves. Every emotion, every part of ourselves that we can at times judge is actually here for a purpose. Let's just choose to allow it to be there in balance and be the leader of our own ecosystem in a way that serves us.
Love that, man. And I feel like it in the past, when I wasn't feeling whole or hadn't done enough healing to feel a sense of self that was healthy, I didn't understand the idea of not trying to get as much as I could, like accumulate as much as I could, take as much as I could, and just continue to go bigger and more and be more self-centered. Like I didn't understand any other way. So if someone came to me and said, well, you could learn to be a leader that's more benevolent and look after the whole, that didn't really even appeal to me because I didn't understand it. And the reason why is because feeling unsafe since I was younger and being a lone wolf, so to speak, I didn't have enough wholeness to understand the fact that I could be in balance and feel a sense of wholeness. But the reason that all this is powerful, to be a benevolent leader, is the most fulfilling state to be in. That's where that internal freedom that we spoke about at the start of this interview comes in. I personally want to be a benevolent leader and want to really play my role of sensing into what's needed and feeling that, because I want to feel a sense of freedom in myself. And that accumulation, like if I was a dingo that was just killing as much sheep as I could, or many kangaroos as I could, just so we could eat and feast and just be some fat dingo, that feels like crap. Like the people that are hoarding and have the greed that's driving their success, aka a previous version of me, even though I was trying to do my best, it's not like a bad intent, but it's like a reactive drive. And that reactive drive leads to suffering for the person that's being greedy or being ego driven. And that's what we're inviting here. Is this is what a big factor that creates that freedom internally.
Yeah, actually, this feels really relevant to bring it back to how this conversation started. From my perspective, you asked about like the embodiment journey of the spiritual journey, right? Like, how am I bringing the spiritual journey into my life? And I feel like one of the lessons that's been so powerful is like when I've experienced these deep states of spiritual bliss, there's such a felt sense that everything is one. It's all interconnected. And then I come back into my human self and it feels like I'm just in my body. It's just me and I'm alone, right? When I'm in sacred union or with my partner, with my wife, I get to experience the expansion of myself where I am me and I'm in deep love with this other person. So like their happiness is my happiness. My happiness is now doubled, right? The capacity for happiness is doubled because there's now two of us. And when we're able to give benevolently, to get that word right, we are able to really feel this sense that what your happiness is my happiness. So why would I not want to expand my sense of self as wide as possible? Why would I not want to really have this felt sense that like all of humanity, all of nature is a part of me? So by choosing to rise and lift up everyone around me, I'm actually now getting to expand my sense of happiness and bliss.
That's so beautiful. And I kind of feel like there's a chicken and egg thing with this, in the sense that you can go out and be of service and attempt to demonstrate benevolence, and it fuels a sense of wholeness. But if you're struggling to give benevolence, then doing the healing work helps make that more organic. And so you have two options, like go out and serve, or if you don't have the capacity to serve yourself through having courage to do the deep inner work that we're kind of talking about on this call, whether it's breath work, plant medicine, cacao ceremonies, going to some kind of like tantric event or whatever, or just showing up in the real world and alchemizing the things that arise trigger wise in your life. You know, that's going to help you be more benevolent in the world, which I'm sure you guys listening have an intuitive sense of.
Yeah, I love that, man. What I hear is just doing your best.
Yeah. Awesome, guys, just go do your best.
Absolutely,
man.
Bro.
Well, I'm feeling like super complete with the chat. I'd really love to give you the opportunity to share anything that you feel called to share, but before tying off any other last messages, where would you like to direct people who have connected with you and your message and would love to know more about you, or inquire to work with you or follow you, or where would you like to direct them?
Bro. Yes, as you said at the start, I'm doing a lot of different things at the moment, and the primary place you can find all of that is on my Instagram. I'm also really taking a lot of this embodiment spirituality work into the corporate space. And so if the corporate leadership sphere is something that resonates with you and you want to know more about, you can connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And there's going to be some exciting retreats and other offerings coming out in the next few months. So just keep an eye on that. There's nothing live at the moment, but stay connected. And if anyone wants to just speak about anything they've got coming up for themselves, or just have any questions, like, I love connecting with people. So feel free to reach out.
Beautiful. I really encourage everyone to go. The link to Paddy's Instagram will be in the show notes. So go check out Paddy, follow Paddy, send him a message and let him know how something on this call in particular resonated with you. I know that you'd love to receive that or a question.
100%, man. 100%.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I appreciate you so much. I loved that chat. It was so much fun. Is there any other last words that you'd love to give the listeners, other than a massive thank you for jumping on?
Well, firstly, thank you so much. And thank you for anyone who's invested their time in really being their best selves and choosing to prioritize, learning and growth and their own journey. I think like off the back of the themes of what we spoke about today, my invitation to people would be to just notice the nature around you. Just notice the way everything's interconnected. Just look for that on a regular basis. Look for it in the way that the seat you're sitting on was once a tree. Look for it in the way that, the meal in front of you has probably 20 plus, maybe upwards of 100 different plants and animals that have contributed to that directly, let alone through all like the different ways that ecosystem has supported those plants to grow. Just look for the ways that everything's interconnected, and don't do this out of obligation. Do it because like this is so magical. There is so much magic around. And I guess one just example I'll give of that and why this helps is that before this podcast, I was actually feeling quite like constricted and in my head and not really very present. And I went and sat by the river, and sitting by the river, the sun was hitting it just at the perfect angle, and the light was bouncing off in all these magical ways. And it just looked like the most incredible fireworks display I've ever seen. And it was free, right there, available in the moment. And every moment that's possible. So just inviting you to really connect with that.
So beautiful. That's a really interesting conclusion, because at the end of our men's retreat that you ran, that I attended, like we were on the balcony at the end, and do you remember the fireworks in the distance just went off for some random reason? We just had like a fireworks display to finish it.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's always available.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for jumping on, man. I really appreciate you showing up and bringing your big, beautiful, open heart. And
thanks,
for the listeners, thank you guys for jumping on and being so open and earnest in your approach to your growth. We both love you guys and are so grateful for you tuning in. So thank you guys.
Much love.
Peace.